A certain man held a feast on his fine estate in town. He laid a festive table and wore a wedding gown. He sent invitations to his neighbours far and wide. But when the meal was ready, each of them replied, I cannot come to the banquet. Don't bother me now. I have married a wife, I have bought me a cow. I have fields and commitments that cost a pretty sum. Pray hold me excused, I cannot come. The master rose up in anger, called his servants by name, said,
Go into the town, fetch the blind and the lame, fetch the peasant and the pauper. For this I have willed, my banquet must be crowded, my table must be filled.
I cannot come.
My dear friends, today we reflect on the Gospel of Luke, chapter 14, verses 15 to 24, wherein Jesus speaks about king's banquet and guests. The Jews had a series of ever-recurring conventional pictures. When God broke into history, one of these was the picture of a messianic banquet. In today's gospel, it is this banquet that the man who spoke to Jesus was thinking. When he spoke of the happiness of those who would be guests at the banquet, he was thinking of Jews and Jesus also. An Orthodox Jew would never have dreamed that Gentiles and sinners would find a place at the feast of God. That is why Jesus spoke this parable. In the parable, the master stands for God. The originally invited guests were Jews. Throughout history, they could find when God would invite only the Jews for the banquet. But when actually Jesus came, he invited everybody. And this was a tragedy for the Jews themselves. Jesus invited poor people, tax collectors, sinners. Jesus in a way made the way to the banquet for everybody. So therefore, in the parable, the invited guests made their excuses and they found excuses to differ from God's invitation. The first man said he bought a field. My dear friends, he allowed the claims of business to usurp the claim of God. He preferred his work instead of God. Today also, we get immersed in the world, in our work so much, we have no time for worship, time for prayer, time for others. The second person said he had bought 5 oxen. When we get something new, our possessions, for example, a mobile, a cell phone, we become so taken up by the thing that we have got, we forget God, we forget people. Thirdly, a person says he married a wife. When we get good things, celebrations, when we are celebrating a feast, our birthdays, or any celebration in the house, a wedding, we give the second place to God, to prayer. And lastly, my dear friends, we remember a person who attends the wedding. It reminds of each one of us. When we say we are Christians, we ought to be with God fully and not partly. Therefore, let this gospel give us a ray of hope, a ray where we can be faithful to God. As Christians, we are called to love our neighbor, called to love God. Let us follow it and be true Christians.
Now God has written a lesson